I'd like to welcome everybody to the Iowa State Dairy Extension webinar today. Today we will be hearing from Amber Friedrichsen. She is the new managing editor of Hay Forage Grower magazine. She grew up on a farm in eastern Iowa and graduated from Iowa State in 2023 with degrees in agricultural communications and agronomy. While in college, Friedrichsen served as the editorial intern for Hay Forage Grower for 2 summers and was the associate editor before assuming her current role. She will give an overview of the alfalfa growing conditions, harvest conditions, and forage test results so far this year. She'll discuss how rainfall, temperatures, and pest management have affected alfalfa yield and quality throughout the growing season, and summarize accounts from area farmers, custom forage harvesters, and forage consultants. It's also an interesting tidbit that she is the second Iowa State University grad who sits in that position at Hay Forage Grower. Amber, we're delighted to have you and look forward to today's presentation. As I always say, the podium is yours.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Fred, and thank you for that tidbit about second managing editor from Iowa State University. My senior editor, Mike Rankin, likes to call Iowa State the Harvard of the Midwest. So that's what we call it around here. But anyway, I suppose I'll get started with this presentation and alfalfa update. And I did go ahead and change the title a little bit to say late season recommendations instead of expectations, because I think what I acquired and what I put together towards the end of my slides are more feeding practices, recommendations, and some stand management suggestions rather than expectations. So, but like Fred said, I'm Amber Friedrichsen with Hay Forage Grower. Our office is based out of Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin, so kind of south central Wisconsin up here. But just giving, oh shoot, now I can't go forward in my slides for some reason. There we go. Just giving a little outline of my presentation for you guys today. I want to start with an overview of weather conditions this summer and how those have affected alfalfa harvest conditions and the challenges that has caused. Spoiler alert, I'm going to use the word rain quite a bit because that was a pretty prominent issue, especially earlier in the growing season for a lot of folks in the Midwest. And that kind of leads me to local hay markets and hay prices. Another spoiler alert, hay prices are sitting pretty low right now. So we're gonna kind of look at those and also give an overview of US hay prices and market conditions. Then I want to touch a little bit on forage quality and kind of look at test results so far this summer. Maybe why forage quality is so low and what we can do with that on farms, on dairies, and manage that and adjust your rations to accommodate for that low quality forage. And then that kind of leads me to some late summer seeding recommendations, maybe taking that late summer cutting to get every last bit of high quality forage you can, maybe to bolster those feed supplies that are lacking from this current summer. So just to get started here, this probably wasn't the slide you were expecting to see, the US drought monitor map, but just a little refresher of where we were sitting last summer, August 2023. Most of you probably remember or maybe wish you could forget the drought conditions we were under in most of Iowa, Wisconsin, Minnesota, then eastern Nebraska and South Dakota. We were very dry, and that was kind of one extreme to the next, looking at August 2024 just now. If we move ahead on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that those drought red, yellow, orange colors are all cleared up. But what this map doesn't show you is the rainfall that we've accumulated throughout the summer. So the next slide here I've got is rainfall precipitation in inches across kind of this Midwestern region. This comes from the High Plains Regional Cropping or Climate Center. I just liked kind of the vibrant colors on the map here to put it into perspective. But on the left-hand side is May through July precipitation in inches. And as you can see, the northern tier of Iowa, central Iowa, southern parts of Minnesota, and most of Wisconsin really just, we had a lot of rain. And to put that into perspective, this right-hand graph is the percent of normal precipitation for May through July. And as you can see, where we got a lot of rain in terms of inches, that was a lot of rain compared to normal too. So Northwest Iowa, that southern tier of Minnesota, really experienced a lot more than we're used to. And that's kind of where I targeted some of my sources I used to put this presentation together, kind of checking in with some producers from those areas that maybe got hit the hardest, and farms that I had been on earlier in the summer. So the next few slides are kind of what I learned from them, what I saw on those farms, what they told me when I called to check in on their growing season. So it's kind of some more anecdotal evidence compared to real hard research data, but I just wanted to share with you guys what I've seen, what I've heard, and maybe that's relatable to your operation and what you're dealing with as well. So the first of all, I wanted to put this slide up here. I stole it from a presentation that John Gazer gave with Hordes Dairymen just last week on corn silage growing conditions, harvest conditions, and corn silage quality this year. So I encourage you guys to go to the Hordes Dairymen webinar archive and check that presentation out as well, because odds are if you're growing alfalfa for dairy feed, you're probably growing corn for silage as well. So John has some good insights on feeding corn silage this season. And that map just kind of puts in perspective those really wet spots across the rest of the US too. So I just wanted to throw that in there as well. But going back to that northern Iowa, southern Minnesota area, the first farmer I kind of connected with and talked to was Kevin Sewer in Zumbro Falls, Minnesota. Just on the map there, you can see it's in the southeast corner of the state. He operates Hyde Park Holsteins, big dairy farm out there that I actually got the chance to visit a couple of times this summer. At Hay Forage Grower here, we pick a week at the beginning of summer, typically around first cutting of alfalfa, and we go on the road for a photo trip. So our editorial team packs up and we plan out farms for a week and just make stops to gather some stories and photos to use for the magazine throughout the year. And Kevin was one of our first stops that week. We showed up on June 4th and had just missed his first cutting of alfalfa, but got to talk to him a little bit and found out that first cutting was delayed quite a bit because of just nonstop rain that was happening in late May, mid to late May. And just a little side note, side story, since I'd missed first cutting, didn't get any field pictures there. Kevin and I agreed he was going to give me a call on June 16th because that was on the calendar to start second cutting, and maybe I could drive back up and get some pictures of equipment in the field. So June 16th rolled around and there were 4 or 5 days of rain in the forecast. We thought we'd just play it by ear. I could drive up when there was a dry day, and that didn't end up happening until about June 25th. I remember the date. So that just puts into perspective what it was like kind of touch and go this summer, just waiting for harvest and waiting for that dry window to cut alfalfa and get it chopped without rain interfering. So like I said, Kevin's first cutting was pretty delayed. Second cutting was delayed even more, and that led to a delayed third cutting, which is pretty recurring theme this summer. And I guess on the flip side of those delayed harvests, the pace at which alfalfa needed to be cut and chopped was really quick because there were really narrow windows of dry weather in between, maybe 2 or 3 days, if that. So overall, Kevin reported that tonnage and quality were both down for his first 3 cuttings of alfalfa so far. And then this is just a picture we took while we were there as well. So those are his cows. But harvest conditions seemingly improved throughout the year. I guess the wettest harvest was first cutting. Maybe second cutting conditions improved just a bit, and third cutting got even better. But with that said, field conditions got worse because it was just kind of compounded damage to saturated soils. This picture on the left here is a picture I took at Kevin's farm during second cutting, just really major wheel damage, and you can see just very saturated soils. And then this picture on the right is one that he sent me just a week ago, and you can see those wheel tracks in the alfalfa regrowth as well. So that was probably the #1 issue that Kevin reported from this growing season, is just how terribly his alfalfa stands have been ripped up because of just high equipment traffic on very wet soils, leading to damage and dead spots, and just not really a pretty picture from that perspective. But regardless, he got in the field and harvested when soils were wet instead of waiting for them to dry out if possible, just to target as best the forage quality that he could. I suppose waiting to let soils dry out a little bit would have maybe alleviated some of that field damage possibly, but on the flip side, that would have caused forage to decline in alfalfa just to get more mature. So in Kevin's case, he was less concerned about high yields. He's got a pretty high haylage inventory on his farm. So fortunately for him, he could rely on that and maybe try and target better quality forage. But again, that trade-off was more damage to his fields. And with that damage in the fields, he's expecting lower alfalfa production and yields next year, which is just another consequence he's coming to terms with. But when I called him last week, he was currently planting some spring barley, which is one of his rotation crops that he takes off in the spring for heifer feed. And then those fields are seeded late summer this time of year to his new alfalfa seedings. Just wanted to touch base and see how that was going. And apparently the rain has not stopped coming after Kevin, even after that rainy month of June that we had, because he let me know they had about half of their new alfalfa acres seeded just a few days ago. Dry forecast, thought it was a good day to get in the field and do that, but unfortunately 6 inches of rain just swept through and unexpectedly flooded out those fields. So he's back to square one, needs to replant those as well as replanting the other half of his alfalfa acres. So just another story there for the wet rainy season that we've had. Didn't stop with harvesting alfalfa. It's affecting new summer seedings as well. This is just another quick little note from that photo trip we took through Minnesota. From Kevin's farm, we headed north to Cambridge, Minnesota to visit Josh Wentworth. He's a hay producer up there. And alfalfa weevil was another very prevailing issue that we saw while we were out and about that first part of June. So Josh sprayed for weevil before first cutting, but he kind of did some on-farm research by accident. I guess he missed a pass in one of his alfalfa fields. You can see on this left-hand picture here, and I put a dotted line in to kind of show, you can see the difference there. On the left-hand side is where it didn't get sprayed, and the right-hand side is where it did. So if you need any evidence of the benefits of spraying for alfalfa weevil, also taking a look at this picture on the right-hand side too, just seeing that skeletonization of the leaves that the pest can cause. And Kevin mentioned too, they'd sprayed for alfalfa weevil before first cutting, and he said if they didn't do that, they wouldn't have had a second cutting. So that was just another issue early on in the harvest season, in addition to all the rain that we were dealing with. So switching gears from a dairy producer growing alfalfa to a hay producer growing alfalfa for baleage, I have another producer contact in Northwest Iowa, Dan Funke's from near Larchwood, which is way up in the corner there. You can see on the screenshot of my Google Maps I put in the slide, but I was on Dan's farm last summer just to go out and meet him, and had a story about him in one of our Hay Forage Grower magazines. But he puts up some pretty low moisture baleage. He's marketing to dairy, so he's really targeting high quality alfalfa. I specifically remember Dan saying he has a no flower policy, so he's really adamant about getting in the field and taking it off at early maturity just to ensure that he's got high quality forage to market to his dairies. But this year was a different story, a lot more difficult to reach those goals and hit those targets, especially in the northwest corner of Iowa. First cutting for Dan was pretty manageable. He got in the field mid to late May and got that off maybe before the tap turned on and didn't seem to turn off. June was a pretty historic month for Northwest Iowa in terms of rainfall, kind of monsoon conditions, I would say. Dan said it was about a year's worth of rain in the month of June, and there was even a 2-day period where they received about 15 inches of rain just within 48 hours. So that kind of shows just how torrential and intermittent the rain showers were. It wasn't a steady season of manageable rainfall. It was pretty intense and extreme. And just beyond the agricultural landscape, that led to some pretty historic flooding in a lot of small towns in Northwest Iowa. So it was a big issue in June, especially. But since June, Dan said it's been a pretty dry July and a dry August. I added another moisture map here on the right just to show precipitation in inches for the state of Iowa for the month of July. And as you can see, Dan's little corner of Northwest Iowa up near Larchwood sitting in the orange and yellow parts of the map. So just shy of 2 or 3 inches for the whole month of July. And specifically on Dan's farm, he said he's gotten about 0.8 of an inch of rain since his second cutting of alfalfa. So talk about going from one extreme to the next and just trying to work around that and manage for those rainfall conditions. But I guess ironically, the rain that has come down from his second cutting seems to have fallen on his third and fourth cuttings of hay. So Dan kind of been dealing with some rained on hay, which is never fun. It's a pretty frustrating situation. And he estimated that his hay that he got put up and baled and wrapped before the rain came versus that hay that did get rained on, there's probably about a 50-point difference in relative feed value. So that just kind of goes to show how devastating a crop of rained on hay can be in really lower forage quality. And there's a few things that producers can do to avoid that rained on hay. As far as cutting alfalfa goes, I guess laying it in a wide swath and really increasing that surface area that forage has to dry down and get solar radiation on the windrow. Wide swaths help with that, as well as conditioning forage. Roller conditioners for alfalfa break open that stem and just kind of expedite that movement of water from the stem to the atmosphere, helping to speed up dry down as fast as possible. Maybe getting a couple hours to a day ahead of schedule. If there's rain in the forecast, you can get baling sooner than if you didn't follow those practices. But in any case, an unexpected rain shower, a pop-up shower, is going to be unexpected and hard to work around. So the quality decline in forage is pretty proportional to the timing and amount of rainfall. So for example, freshly cut hay, get some rain dumped on it, might not be as critical or detrimental to forage quality as it would be if forage had time to dry down and wilt in the windrow and then receive some rainfall. So that's when you're going to see greater dry matter losses in hay, greater forage quality losses in hay, because that rain is going to cause the soluble carbohydrates to leach out, and that's going to leave you with higher concentrations of the structural carbohydrates or the fiber components of forage, really bringing down forage quality. And I did in this slide, I suppose my bullet point says protein, it's relatively unchanged. I think I would reword that or state that differently. I guess rain on hay doesn't necessarily affect crude protein levels in the forage, but issues with leaf loss and leaf shatter that can happen after hay gets rained on can negatively affect protein concentration and forage quality as well. So just directly impacting that leaf integrity and causing some leaf loss when it gets rained on, or some mechanical manipulation that needs to happen after hay's rained on, like raking or tedding to kind of get hay dry again, that can cause some leaf loss and shatter, and therefore protein loss as well. So these are just all really negative effects of rained on hay, but I'm sure most producers experience this at some point throughout the growing season, because there just was not a great window to cut hay and get it off the field before something rolled through and brought some moisture there. And just a shout out, this is a picture from my dad, Andy Friedrichsen. He sent it to me July 26th. He was baling hay from Eastern Iowa, and he raises beef cattle. So not necessarily as concerned with forage quality as a dairy producer, but I just thought I'd put it out there, because no matter what type of forage or what quality forage you're targeting or harvesting, rained on hay is just never a good day. So he was not happy to share this photo with me, but he might be happy to see in the presentation. So back to Dan Funky making baleage in Northwest Iowa throughout all this wet weather. Dan typically targets the lower end of the moisture spectrum for baleage. He's putting up 20 to 25% moisture baleage, which is pretty low. I guess some people would even consider that sweet hay instead of a fermented baleage product. But this year, just because of how wet harvest conditions were and trying to move forage off the field as fast as possible, he was wrapping bales at about 60% moisture, which is on the upper end of that baleage moisture range typically recommended. And for that reason, trucking's been a lot more expensive for Dan. That's probably his biggest issue or biggest challenge this season, whereas Kevin's was wheel traffic damage and torn up alfalfa fields. Dan's is more expensive trucking, because with heavier bales, you can fit fewer on a load. So you're going to have more truckloads. And that is just something he wasn't anticipating or budgeted for this season. But I guess that's just another consequence of the wet weather that we've had. In any case, Dan is optimistic, which I appreciate his optimism. He anticipates taking 2 more cuttings of alfalfa yet this year. And right now, things are looking conditions are looking good for those aspirations, I guess, in terms of field conditions and moisture. With that said, overall, local hay prices are pretty low. They're not where Dan would want them to be, and forage quality is not where he wants it to be either, selling to dairies. So that's another challenge he's kind of working out now on the tail end of the harvest season. In any case, he's maybe hopeful for a price rebound. I just added this in here as a little anecdote, but Dan shared an old wives' tale with me about fog predicting rain in 90 days. So I guess back in March and April, had some foggy mornings and foggy spring days, which led to some pretty intense rainfall in May and June. So he shared that August has so far been a pretty foggy month and maybe anticipates a wet fall, but that's just speculation. Like I said, maybe you can find that old wives' tale in the Old Farmer's Almanac. It's not factual by any means, but sometimes they ring true. So I just thought I would put that in there. And with a wet fall, he expected maybe finding a market for low quality forage to more beef feedlots who would typically use cornstalk bales or grazing to feed their cattle. They might be looking for a different source of forage if it is a wet fall. So maybe some lower quality product could find a home there. And switching gears a little bit to come back to those local hay prices, I just want to stress that hay markets and hay prices are regional. So it really has to do with the growing conditions, harvest conditions that are happening in the area. And in the area that Dan and Kevin are in, that southern Minnesota, northern Iowa, northwest Iowa, there's a really high supply of low quality hay and a really low demand for it. So that's probably what's pulling prices down in those areas. And again, those prices are lower what hay producers are budgeting for. And on the flip side of that, with a high supply of low quality forage, that means there's a low supply of high quality forage, and that's what dairies are looking for. So I did want to touch a little bit on US hay prices. The graph on the left here is just shows a weighted average of all hay grades, the average price for those from the USDA. And when I say local hay prices are low or US hay prices are low, that's really all relative compared to the historically high prices that we saw back 2022, 2023. Those were just historically high prices for many factors all coming together to play into those hay prices. But when you look a little bit farther back in the timeline, you'll see that hay prices right now for 2024, it's really not that much farther off than what they were before that big spike kind of within the past few years. So it might be more of a psychological issue when we talk about low hay prices compared to years past, because they might not be so far off from typical, but they are very far off from where they were last year and the year before. So the chart on the right-hand side here is just the monthly hay prices for the premium and premium quality alfalfa hay, just to put that in perspective for the top dairy states here. At the bottom, you can see for June 2024, it was going for $256 a ton. That dropped about $20 a ton from the month before, and it was a more significant drop from year over year, June 2023, premium and supreme quality prices. So I just wanted to throw that in there too, because this 5-state average hay price is used in the dairy margin coverage program. So keeping an eye on those US hay price averages affects more than just what you're paying for hay. It affects the dairy margins and those coverage programs as well. But a couple other factors just to speculate on why total US hay prices are so much lower. The most recent crop production report from the USDA projected a 5% increase in alfalfa and alfalfa hay mix production this year. It's not because we're necessarily planting more acres of hay or growing more acres of hay, but it's because of higher yield per acre in alfalfa stands. So, and that might come back to those delayed cuttings. Just alfalfa yield was going up that time because forage was becoming more mature and just adding some more biomass to those acres. But again, that was not quality forage. So maybe another reason why we're sitting on high supply of low quality alfalfa. Another USDA report, the May 1 hay stocks also showed the highest level since 2017. So on the flip side of that, hay disappearance, which is hay feeding for the most part, was at a record low. So that just couples in with the crop production report to show why we have so much low quality forage. One note I wanted to make was that the beef and dairy herds, the national herd size has been pretty low for the past few years, just as a result of culling cattle throughout the drought years, the past few years. But those numbers have been on the upswing. It's been pretty slow, a pretty slow rebound for beef and dairy numbers. But Mike Rankin, my senior editor here at Hay Forage Grower, said that could be a positive for hay prices moving forward. But regardless, it's maybe a small positive, at least for current market conditions. And one more factor to touch on is just competitive feed prices can affect hay prices too. So we're looking at pretty low corn and soybean prices in the commodity market right now, and that can have an effect as well. Again, it's all relative though, because those low corn and soybean prices are coming down from historical highs themselves. So just got to keep that in mind when we're grumbling about hay prices or commodity prices right now. I just added this slide too to give a visual for those May 1 hay stocks. Back in May, it was 21 million tons of hay. That was up about 50% year over year. And like I said, that is coupled with a record low disappearance of about 55, 56 million tons between December of last year and May of this year. So just really trying to hit home why we have so much low quality forage on the market right now. So what do we do with all this low quality forage? That is a question I came to John Gazer with. He's with Rock River Laboratory here in Watertown, Wisconsin, as well as Cows Agree Consulting. So I just wanted to pick his brain about maybe why forage quality was down so much and what we can do when we're feeding that out after having such a challenging year harvesting it. So he helped me out, gave me some data from Midwest forage samples so far this year. So that's combined data from all the Midwest states, not necessarily just this Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin region that I've been talking about for most of the presentation, but kind of just I summed up the NDF, so the neutral detergent fiber, TDN, total digestible nutrient concentrations in those forage quality samples so far for both hay and haylage. So here on this slide, you'll see the top graph is haylage samples and the bottom slide is hay samples. And then within those graphs, the top curve is from this year, 2024 so far. And then the bottom curve is from last year, 2023. So as you can see, just in this top haylage graph here, NDF levels in haylage samples have really kind of extended that bell curve in that right-hand tail. So between, 40, 50, 60% NDF, there's a lot higher concentration of forage that is testing in that higher range of neutral detergent fiber. And the same can be said for hay samples that have been tested so far this year. Seems like it just kind of keeps increasing. On that bottom graph, you can see the curve past 50% NDF goes up a lot higher than it has last year and years past. And just once again, a couple of factors for that, likely the delayed harvest, delayed cuttings, as forage gets more mature in alfalfa stands, it's going to become more lignified and fiber concentrations are going to go up, causing NDF levels to rise as well. So that rained on hay situation as well, as the water soluble carbohydrates are leached out and expended, the fiber concentrations are consequently going to go up. So couple those together, if you have a delayed harvest and your hay gets rained on, that's kind of a double whammy there in terms of forage quality. And on the flip side of that, total digestible nutrients and these forage quality samples kind of tell the opposite story. For the haylage samples that I pulled into this graph, you can see kind of just more samples are testing lower TDN 2024 compared to last year, and the hay graph kind of looks the same. So that left-hand tail and the bell curve is a lot thicker for 2024. So what do we do with this information? John's first suggestion was to test and sample forage as it goes into storage. So when you're putting it into that silage bag or that bunker pile, test it then just to get an idea of what you're working with. Take samples and test forage on the way out at feed out as well. But when you do it ahead of time, it just gives you a ballpark estimate or a benchmark of the sort of forage that you've harvested and kind of start making a plan from there. So you're probably going to have to redefine what's high quality forage and what's low quality forage on your farm, just because the alfalfa that was harvested late and rained on and all of these other unfortunate events that happened are kind of probably pulling our standards a lot lower for feeding this year. With that said, to kind of fill those gaps and rations and fill those nutrients that we're not getting out of our alfalfa like we would like to, John suggested leveraging those low commodity prices. So maybe that's a silver lining for low feed prices, is that we can tap into low corn and soybean prices and maybe use ingredients such as corn gluten feed, which might be a good source of digestible fiber. If alfalfa is high in undigestible fiber or more lignified because of those delayed harvests, corn gluten feed might be a good resource there, as well as soy hulls. That's another source of energy that can maybe add to dairy rations and make up for those gaps. Those aren't the only options though, so I encourage you to be strategic and maybe think outside the box with what you're adding and supplementing rations with. Talk to your nutritionist, see what you can do, and maybe look at a budget and see how much you can leverage and how much you can play around with what you're using to supplement the alfalfa we've got this year. But with that said, John also left with an optimistic note of strong positive margins are ahead. So don't lose hope in your feeding plans and feeding practices. This poor alfalfa crop we had this summer isn't the end of the world. There's still a lot to look forward to, and we can be flexible and make the best of what we got. Switching gears a little bit from feeding to more of the agronomic suggestions that I compiled and wanted to share with you guys, kind of thinking back to Kevin's tore up alfalfa fields from his wet harvests and running equipment on saturated soils. I think a lot of people are probably dealing with similar issues as far as stand damage goes, and that's going to have some pretty long-term effects on future yields. If it already didn't affect second and third and subsequent cuttings this year, it's going to in the years to come. So John Gazer shared with me that Todd Schomburg, one of his colleagues in eastern Wisconsin, predicted that heavy wheel damage and traffic from wet harvest this year, that might take 1 to 2 years off of a alfalfa stand's productive life. So instead of just waiting around for that yield drag to happen next year and seeing how significant it really turns out to be, he suggested being proactive and not reactive when it comes to maybe taking that stand of alfalfa out of production, depending on how old it is right now, and moving forward in the crop rotation to get it back into alfalfa sooner rather than later, and not just waiting for lower yields next year to occur. So to maybe put that into a visual here, I took these slides from a presentation that Dennis Hancock with the USDA Dairy Forage Research Center up in Madison, Wisconsin had. They're adapted from Dan Understander with the University of Wisconsin. But on the left-hand side here, it just kind of shows alfalfa yield or relative yield of maximum production across the stand life. So as you can see, after the third or fourth year of an alfalfa stand's life, it's just on the decline as far as percent of maximum yield is going to go. So when you factor in that 1 to 2 years, we might have pushed stand life ahead with extra damage and wheel traffic from wet harvest conditions. You're just kind of dropping lower and lower in that yield curve. And the same can pretty much be said for this graph on the right-hand side here, which shows seasonal yield, but in tons of dry matter per acre, across the stand life. So again, after that third or fourth year of an alfalfa stand, dry matter per acre is really going to taper off. So when you factor in that stand damage, you're probably not going to get what you want and might even drop below that break-even level, which just might incentivize ripping out that alfalfa this year and moving forward if damage was pretty detrimental in your field. So with that said, in that case, if taking alfalfa out of production and moving on is something you're interested in or looking to consider, that late summer cutting of alfalfa might actually offer an opportunity to capture some more high quality forage that we didn't get earlier in the growing season. I know some people avoid that late summer cutting of alfalfa just to let plants rest and recuperate before the winter and really reestablish their root carbohydrate reserves to make it through winter without winter injury or winter kill. But in the case of taking stands out of production, we can kind of harvest that alfalfa without suffering the consequences of winter kill because we're planning on rotating that field anyway. So that's an option. I'd encourage you to consider if you're in this situation, especially if the forage that you're sitting on from the previous months is low quality. Maybe take a chance and take advantage of maybe better growing conditions to get some of that last minute high quality alfalfa out yet this summer into fall. With that said, John also suggested going in and planting a fall forage to boost your forage inventory, or maybe even diversify your forage inventory, filling in some of those forage quality gaps that we're seeing. This picture on the left here is just a field of oats, which sometimes are planted in the spring, but can also be a pretty useful fall forage, and can be made for hay or haylage, whatever your feeding preferences are. And then also just tapping into other alternative forages or planting a forage this fall into the winter that can be harvested in the spring. Just kind of, again, getting creative, thinking outside the box with what we can do, where we're at, and what we have. So in summary here, kind of wrapping up my presentation, I think I said the word rain a lot more than anybody probably wants to hear it, but it has been a rainy summer, and that's affected our harvest timing first of all, and then led into some challenges with forage quality. So that's just been a recurring theme I wanted to summarize and share some stories with about for you guys here today. Again, that low quality forage is in high supply. There's pretty low demand. So unless you have a unique niche market to go to with your low quality forage, we're just going to have to see how that pans out and maybe how prices are affected down the line if demand or supply changes from here. Again, go ahead, get creative with your ration formulation just to make up for the low quality forage that we've got, and be proactive about your stand management this fall. Consider your options as far as terminating alfalfa or seeding the new seeding, or just rotating to a different alternative fall forage to boost your feed supplies this year. This is one of my last slides here. Again, I'm Amber Friedrichsen with Hay Forage Grower magazine. Go ahead and check out our website, hayandforage.com, for anything about alfalfa. We've got some stuff, some current stuff this year, to read more about what I was talking about today, or just anything forage related. And you can also please email me or give me a phone call if you have any questions or want to talk or share anything with me there. And I guess this is just a photo that Mike and I took recently for some promotional materials, but it's kind of funny. I thought I would include it just so you could get a sense of who we are and what we do. But I know this is a part of the presentation where I usually ask if you guys have any questions, but I kind of wanted to flip the script and ask my own question and see if anyone's willing to share maybe their experience with alfalfa harvest this summer, or maybe the challenges or solutions that they've come across as far as rainfall and field conditions have gone. So I'll open the floor maybe to some more discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Amber. We've got a fairly small group. If they just want to unmute and ask the question directly, I would encourage that. I'm not seeing anybody unmute. I want to remind everybody that they go to the chat, they'll see that this webinar will be archived at the Iowa State Dairy Team website. And there's a link there for a short survey after they see it, whether archived or today. If they would answer those, it's only 4 questions. That really helps us as we prepare new programming. I'll give just a couple of seconds and see if anybody unmutes. Jen, do you see, or do you have any questions you want to respond to?
I don't see any coming in the chat yet, Fred.
Okay. I've got a couple questions. I've seen several loads of grass hay come in. That's probably better grass than I've seen in at least a year. Are we seeing some high quality grass that can be utilized in our dairy rations?
I guess that is a good question. I suppose when I was talking to John Gazer, just kind of encouraging producers to be creative with their rations and forage options, grass hay would probably, or grass haylage as well, would probably be something to look into and tap into. I guess I don't have the best insight as far as forage quality analysis goes for those species, but definitely one of those other alternatives that we can use instead of alfalfa.
You know, as we see some fairly low quality alfalfa, it just jumped right out when I saw, wow, That has got a really good test paper on it. Where is the best alfalfa coming from? Are we seeing that? I saw a couple loads that looked really good coming out of South Dakota, a couple of loads that came out of Kansas that looked way better than some we had up here in Northwest Iowa. What are you seeing across the country?
I would be curious to know where it's coming from too. I was just on a farm in Kansas not too long ago. And I think where I was at, Kansas is kind of dealing with some different, I guess, weather conditions, but they'd been pretty dry and everything was under irrigation. So since they kind of had control of their moisture and their pivot systems, they were putting up some pretty high quality hay there. So maybe in those climates in those regions where they have better control of the rainfall this year, that's really gonna benefit their forage quality a lot better than what we're seeing here in our neck of the woods.
Okay, if somebody's got a question, go ahead. Ray, I see you've unmuted.
Yeah, I already stated my question in the comments, but I was just wondering if there was a good resource that provides local evaluations of new alfalfa cultivars. I mean, seed companies have good information, but I didn't know if there was something that was kind of independent from the seed companies that can maybe provide, comparisons across those genetic bases.
Yeah, I'll look into that, Ray, and I will get back to you on that. I guess I'm not quite sure if this is exactly what you're asking, but in our November Hay and Forage Grower issue, we do have a list of the NAFA alfalfa varieties. And that, I guess, like I said, will be coming out in November. But if there's a different database or a different resource I can find for you, I'd be interested in looking into that myself as well. So I'll make a note of that too.
Sure, I just didn't know. I mean, coming from Northeast Iowa, it's always nice to know what may survive better in our climate and stuff like that, as opposed to what's on the rating scale in a sales book or something like that. And so it's just nice to see how things performed locally. And I don't know of any university research doing that. And I just didn't know if you had known of any companies, or not necessarily companies, but cooperating organizations that did that type of service.
Sure. Yeah. And especially in a year like this, it'd be interesting to see how different varieties held up under the wet conditions too. So yeah.
Sure.
Thank you for bringing that up.
One of the things that as an extension person, we see some pretty good research in Nebraska. We see some corn silage research in South Dakota. But in Eastern Iowa, those don't mean much to you because you're different. Just like when I make a silage variety recommendation, it's pretty hard to use Wisconsin data because we don't have the climate, we don't have the soils Wisconsin do. So yeah, tell your extension researchers we need to see more of that kind of research. It would certainly help us out as dairy producers. Any other questions? I've got one more, and I'm an economics kind of a guy. What are you seeing in the alfalfa export market, especially West Coast seems to be ticking up, more boats, loads. What are you seeing, or what do you expect to see?
I'm glad you brought this up because this is something I didn't include in the presentation, but I did ponder, I guess, before putting it together. Export demand is lower. And a lot of that, I guess, in the past few months have had to do with the really strong US dollar and the kind of challenging exchange rates. But that might be another factor of lower hay prices too, is export demand is just not where it used to be, not where it is now. So yeah, I don't know if there's any speculation on where that might go in the future months. I could have done my research on that in particular a little better, but yeah, that's not the rosiest situation either as far as hay production is going out west. And that kind of paints the picture for the rest of the US market as well. So we're not sitting as as tight as we used to be on the export market.
Is that really just driven by China, or is there more aspects around the Pacific Rim that, affect that?
Yeah, there are several factors that play into it. I know China's just been our biggest export market for alfalfa hay for a long time. So they're when they have a significant, decline in export or imports, I should say, that's really affecting the market. But there's probably more that goes into it than just China. And then when you look at total export markets, including grass hay sales, that spans a lot farther than China as well.